he was like, the next generation, you are going to be the ancestor, so be the best ancestor. Is that there were stories I was living that were not my stories. That I was living someone else's stories. Well, it's just by that there. So those are my two things. Think about your identity, challenge it, and then be a good person.
All right, we're live with another episode of The Shift. This is a conversation that I absolutely truly look forward to every week or every alternate week as we do it. Um, Today, we have on our podcast a great friend and someone that I've been very inspired with, all the way from New Zealand. And we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things. But as we always do, this space is about pausing, reflecting, and really understanding what the person is when you strip away the roles, the titles, and the techniques. So before I really, waste more time, let me just call my dear friend Prajesh Channabhai, all the way from New Zealand. Prajesh, how are you?
Hey, Adnan, how's it going? Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for stopping by and thank you for being here.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. I heard you saying it's been a long time coming, and yeah, I want to share with your listeners out there that you said you're inspired by me, but I'm very inspired by what you do and how you've done and the impact that you make in the world. But also, I want to share with the world that Adnan is a comedic genius as well. So I think sometimes he's a comic or a coach. I don't know, just interchange the C's.
Yeah, I think I'll take the compliment. There was a time I couldn't take compliments, but now I think I have moved in the journey. I'll take the compliment. It's a funny story. I was when I was young. I remember it was 4 or 5, and we had these school bands that you have in India, Pakistan, I'm sure, as well in India and other smaller countries. So they pick you and drop you and so on, and there's always a fist fight going on with boys and stuff like that. So what they used to do was that they would just bring me to this irritating sentences that would just really piss me off, and I'd come home crying. So I did that for a couple of days, and then my mom said, "Well, what are you crying about? Laugh, have fun." And I think that's what I've been doing for the past so many years, decades now, and I just love it. So it is fun, and life should not be taken as seriously as a lot of us do. Sure, life is challenges, but here we are. So, but
Here we
enough
are.
about me. Thank you for bringing that up. And I understand that it's pretty late in New Zealand right now. What's the time? It's probably 11.
Yeah, yeah. It's 10 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock. Yeah, but that's
10
okay.
o'clock.
Yeah.
So still pretty decent in some ways.
Yes.
But you look sleepy. Are you sleepy?
I've had a big day, but that's okay. That's all right. I'm awake for you. I might look sleepy, but my mind is awake for you.
No, you don't look sleepy, but it's like yes, you do seem to have had a long day. So,
Yeah.
uh, how has the journey been so far from where you started off to who you are today?
Yeah, what a great question. So one of the things that I think we'll mention as we go to the conversation is I really honed into this concept of identity, and I love the way you asked this question because if you asked me this question 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, as to who I was and what I'm doing, I wouldn't have the answer to that there. And the journey has been all over the place. So I grew up in Zimbabwe. This is where I was born and raised, and my formative years are in Africa. But I was born to parents. My dad is from Zimbabwe generationally, so my great, so 5 generations in Africa, and my mom is from India. So you have this confluence of someone that is Indian ethnicity, who is my dad, who has got the cultural downplay of Indian culture, and my mom who's come from India, living in Africa, and
So some wiring
so
from here and some wiring from there, and then there's a lot of red light and red wire and the green wire, as they say.
100%. So the identity now becomes really confused. Am I Indian? I look Indian. I'm born in Africa, raised in Africa. So what is my identity? Who am I as a person? And then fast forward, I go into my study in South Africa, and then fast forward, I now live in New Zealand. So what is my identity? Who am I? Who am I as a person? And what are my formative years? So that has been a really interesting journey for me, and which is why, and I guess one of the benefits or the joys of doing what we do in coaching and development, because at the root of it all, it's all about who we are as people, and it goes back to what you said at the start. We made a joke about you being a comic and a coach, but as you said, it goes back to when you were young. It wasn't something that happened yesterday. It was something that your mom told you when you're young, and that has framed the way you think about things right now. So yeah, that's been a basis of what I do and how I do things.
Yeah, and it takes an intelligent man actually to pick up the comic streaks as well. So I, give you that compliment too.
I'll
And
take
I've
it.
always felt that underlying current of this deep emotional intelligence and understanding of different people in different culture. Is that coming from? I mean, I can count four. There's an Indian influence, there's an African influence overall, then there's a South African influence, which is a very different influence, I'm sure, back in the day when you were studying there. And then there's this New Zealand influence, the Oceania influence, and that's so multiple streams really shaping you up. Which do you identify most with?
That is the hardest question. And I don't know if I identify from in any one particular, but I think I borrow learnings from every single one of them. And I now have reached a stage in my life where I've spent almost the same amount of time in New Zealand than I was in Africa. So now the question starts going, all right, cool. What am I really? Am I from Africa, or am I from New Zealand? Or am I from India? Because I have Indian roots, and it's really hard. But again, living in New Zealand, it is a extremely multicultural, multi diverse country. So even within New Zealand, I have been exposed to so many different cultures, and each one of them leaves its mark. And also, thinking about our conversation and connection with yourself and our colleagues from Pakistan, I've never had a close connection, but over the last 5 years, I've been learning about, yourself, Khadija. That also adds a little bit of a flavor of looking at things from a different lens. So, back to your question, which one? I think it's a mixture of everything, which makes it really exciting.
Yes. So let me put it this way. What's the I'm thinking of a food metaphor and I don't want to. But what's really, if you put in all these spices and these ingredients in that big pot, what
Yeah.
is it that we're really tasting when I see Prajesh in front of me?
What are you tasting? Hopefully you're tasting something delicious, but
Oh, delicious for
uh,
sure. Let's not go into the food metaphors. It somehow sounds wrong.
we'll,
Let's go
we'll go
back.
with the metaphor. We'll go. I love the metaphor, but I think it'll definitely come from my African upbringing, African roots, because I grew up in a time just after independence in Zimbabwe. So lots of the world is lots of flux, but lots of opportunity. Skin color used to be a determining factor of the way things were done. When I was growing up, that wasn't the case. It was all inclusive. And then while I was growing up, the skin color came into play, and it shifted again the narrative. So where the color of your skin determined different outcomes or no outcomes. So it's been an interesting driver, and also a different way of looking at the world, because you're seeing people that are being prejudiced because of their skin color. And you think about, you said the question, emotional intelligence. You start empathizing with, okay, actually, yesterday everything was all hunky dory, but in one day, one government regulation means that things change just because of the way you look, and that's
Yeah.
just it's pretty crazy.
It's actually yes, because these are things that are not in your control. Even I mean, I'd go so far to say that, of course, ethnicity, but also in a lot of cases, religion or the
Yeah,
the the ideology that you typically follow is not really in your control, because the environment has shaped you that way to accept certain norms, right? So, for example, the
100%.
norms in New Zealand would be very different, and I'm sure you got a decent, if not very high, culture shock when you went from South Africa to New Zealand, and then meeting a
Yeah.
lot of other people and the multicultural within those pockets as well.
Yeah, and this is very true. I don't think people understand the impact of culture shock. It's a very real thing. We will say it, but I mean, you may have faced it as well in your time when you go to different places. But when you live in a different place, the norms that you have in where you've grown up versus the norms in your new world, a chalk and cheese, and you have to
Yeah,
try and adapt. And we go, okay, cool. What is my world now?
basic things like, for example, the way they use the words, the way the language is built. Even if you speak in the same language, I mean, Zimbabwe and South Africa and New Zealand, all English, but the way the language is framed, the way the accents are, the way the words are used, they all mean so many different things to different cultures and how you put it. How was your experience when
Yeah,
you were transitioning, if that is the right word?
yeah. So I'm gonna. This is a story I share openly with people that ask this question here. So I grew up in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa as well. And in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa, we have a ethnicity. You know, when you're answering the census that says, are you African, American, whatever, you pick your box, and one of the boxes is colored. Colored. So colored is a mixture of black and white. It forms ethnicity. So that was my world. I grew up in the world. You use say the word colored, and I came to New Zealand, and in New Zealand, the indigenous people are called the Maori people. Yeah, and when I met my first Maori person, I was like, "Oh, you are colored," and I nearly got smashed for that there because in here, me saying someone is colored is an insult, and I was like, "Ugh." So I learned very quickly about languaging that actually, that is a whole different world. I can't just use these words that are by my norm. And then there's lots of different stories and different words. So in New Zealand, for example, there's a phrase that is used all the time, and it still baffles everyone. It's called when you agree with something, you say yeah, no, which means yes, no, but yes, or it says
Yeah.
no, yeah, which means no, but yes, and you're like, this is so confusing. Is it a yes or is it a no? So yeah, it's just those simple things there.
That must have been a bummer because what are you saying? Should I say that this is a yes? Should I say this is a no? Imagine a
Yeah,
guy proposing to his girlfriend and like, yeah, no, and you're like, is that a yes? Give the ring, or should I just put it in my
yeah,
back pocket? We have this
yeah,
not very of common Urdu expression, but sometimes it says something like, uh, "Nahi, haan, you're right." And so it starts with no and then says yes, you're right. So what does it know about, what is the yes about, and why are you saying that? But
yeah,
people,
yeah.
languages have their own cultural quirks, right? Not
They
in a
should.
bad
They
way,
should.
they're just showing the character of how they've developed culturally. But
Totally.
how do you so what are the values that you feel were challenged for you as you grew up and as you are today?
Oh, so many things I've done. So I growing up in Zimbabwe, um, amazing place growing up, but it is a secular state, so Christian, which meant that it's very one party. This is it. You're not exposed to anything apart from what the government says. So my values at that point in time were driven by obviously my family values, but your environment, as you know, shapes a lot of your values.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, this is the way the world is. And then I moved to South Africa, and I was like, whoa, this is the world is a different place. And then when I moved to New Zealand, I realized actually, what actually are my values? What do I stand for? If everything was taken away from me, what are my values? And I think, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well. I think it's only when we get older, that we start realizing what our true values are. Um, whatever they are. But it's when you're young, you think this is what it is. But when you're in your mid 20s, get to your 30s, and you start thinking, actually, what is the non-negotiable for me in any situation? And I love your thoughts. Do you feel the same, or do you think that the values are locked in from day one?
It's a complex question, really. We teach values a lot. We teach that in NLP, we teach that in ICF, we teach that in
Hmm.
separate things, a lot of things. Um, so I think generally values are dependent on the kind of beliefs that you want to have about yourself, right? So
Hmm.
um, you can change some values, but not all of them. So
Yep.
if your value is, let's say, so there's the core value and there's a lived value, right?
Hmm.
So the
Yep.
expression of value changes, but values that are not fulfilled continue to drive you forward in a lot of ways. Values that are fulfilled maybe, you know, need other expressions. So I
Yeah,
mean, I think values are locked, but I have not seen values changing majorly. So the surface
yeah,
level values continue to change, right? So,
yeah,
but if I value family or affection, that's what is going to show up for me all through my life.
yeah,
And that is dependent on the beliefs that I have, right? Whether I deserve the affection or whether I have affection, and the way I therefore operate on that. So it's a debatable thing, but to me, values are not very changing, uh,
yeah.
and that's why I see a lot of people going into the same loop. Unless you change the belief structure, unless you change the identity structure of the person.
That's right. That's right. And I think this is what happened with me. My belief structure changed and my identity structure changed, which then affected some of my values. However, on reflection as well, it was the lived values that changed, not the core values. So
Yeah,
the expression of the core values changed, but the core value was still the same.
yeah, yeah. And I see you do a lot of work with younger people on transitioning and identity and a lot of things. Um, how's your background? How's your the way you've evolved? How's that speaking to your work?
Yeah, so my story is ridiculously crazy, but like many people in the world, you think you have a life pathway, then life tone changes up. So my I'll go back a little bit. So my first degree is in computer science. So computer science and information systems is my first degree. However, when I was doing that degree, I didn't enjoy it. It was not my thing. But what I did enjoy was I enjoyed teaching when I was in the classes, tutoring and da da da. I then did my master's in New Zealand, and I really just loved teaching. But when I came over here, I came over as an international student. Now the rates, as you know, are pretty crazy. So my parents were like, "We can't afford, we can't afford this. You need to think about how you're going to subsidize while you're living here." That's when I started. I lived in the dorms in the hall in the university, and I got a job in the dorms as I was an RA. And that's when I was introduced to young people. So now I'm just trying to picture this. I was living with 400 young people between the ages of 17 and 19, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah. So 24/7, 365 days a year. And this is where I started understanding, oh, this is a really different world, different way of thinking. And that actually framed my PhD as well. So my PhD then looked at how young people, that age group, they're using social media to share information. This is a long time ago when social media was in infancy. But that's when I started realizing young people have a lot. Actually, I have a lot to learn from young people, but what is happening in that crucial phase? If you think about yourself, Adnan, and I think about myself at the ages of 17, 18, 19, those are crucial stages in your life when you are away from home, figuring out what's next in your life. And that was a real crazy thing for me. So I was a lecturer. I was teaching, big groups of students. And then I shifted a little bit and I started working in high schools around New Zealand. So for the next 15 years, I was traveling all around New Zealand and working in high schools all around New Zealand and looking at this transition phase. What are the questions they have? What are the fears that they have? And what are the common threads that you see across the country? A lot of people think that this is just me, but the thread is common everywhere. And this is when I started thinking about that identity conversation that people are having. So if we think about it, so for example, when I was working with Southeast Asian families, so Chinese and or Indians or anyone from that part of the world, the identity they were given that is for you to be successful, you have to be a doctor, an engineer, lawyer, and those vocations. And it really astounded me because this is languaging that comes from India, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia, but it's still alive and real here in New Zealand. And if a young person wanted to be an artist, there was like, oh no, you're not the family. Conversely, if I go and talk to someone from Pacifica culture or a Maori culture, for them going to university is success. Doesn't matter what it is, it's success. So you see the very different narrative right there. And then when I was speaking to Europeans, it was, whatever you want to do, it's success is success, depending on, again, where they come from. So those conversations really got me thinking about what actually is the conversation that's happening. Is it the young person making the decision, or is it the external world making them make those choices? And I noticed that when I started 15 years ago to when I last finished the job, the narrative started changing because the outside world became more of the conversation influencer as opposed to inner dialogue. Because what happened is over the last 15 years, you see the world of social media, you see the world of comparison, you see the world of, um, Prajesh is 21 and he's got $1 million right on a jet. And Adnan is going, wait a minute, why should I study when I can see Prajesh is doing that there? Conversely, Prajesh is not living that life there. So, what was happening with the story, the mental health, the well being, the stresses? That was what I really got into and really fascinated by that there. And then conversely, on saying that, you have the parents as well who are now living in a generation that's very different to our parents, right? They have these young people that have all this information. They've got to have the same. Okay, I've got to be one step ahead if I can. And how are you one step ahead of your children when they are active on social media, and you're a parent just trying to do the best that you can? So their conversation also becomes really muddied. And what do we do, and how do we become the best parents that we can? So it's a real. I mean, I don't have any solutions here, but that was my foray into the world. And each person is very different, but it's very profound.
Yeah, that's there's so many layers to this. Um, let me just start off with one, and not in any particular order. But do you see that the world, the children from, let's say, 16 to 19, I mean, the last 2 years of high school and the first year of university, that's a very critical age that we're talking about. Do you think they've become more competitive and taking that pressure of competitiveness versus, let's say, 15 years ago, or when you and I were children, maybe?
Yeah, that's a question I wish I knew the answer to. But what I think is, the age group, the young people right now have so much information. They have way more information than you and I had at 16 years old. When we had 16, we just had a textbook. If you want an encyclopedia, you go to the library and you get what you want and off you go. Whereas now, by the touch of their phone, the whole world, they connect to the whole world. So as you know, as a coach, you have this whole huge paradox of choice. So much choice now. Am I making the right choice because I have all this information here? What if I do this here? And that just overwhelms them. So which means that they've got all the information, but how do you assimilate? Because the brain, as you know, Adnan, is the same. The brain hasn't evolved at the rate that all this information has. So as a 16-year-old, you're now getting information that even as a 30 or 40-year-old, you're trying to distill. But at a 16-year-old brain, which is still developing, they're going, I've got all this information. Am I making the correct choice? Is it because their frontal lobe is not yet developed, so the risk of risk averseness is very different. On top of that, it's not just information; it's the way the information is shared. So there's information, but now the way it's portrayed is it's easy for me now to so for example, this whole conversation today, 16 years ago, oh, sorry, when we were 16, this wouldn't be happening. You and I would not be having this conversation face
Yeah.
to face. Not happen, right? It'll be a telegram or whatever. We wouldn't even know each other. But today, think about the young person. They go online, whatever they choose, they have the same information, and they go, oh, look at this person doing this here. So they're comparing the current state with what they're saying. We've heard this many times. You're comparing your life with someone else's highlight reel. And it sounds cliche, but it's actually happening. It's really, really happening. And I'm going to share something that really blew my mind. So when I was working at a girls' school a few years ago, they did a bit of a survey and they said to the girls, hey, what is your number one fear at school? What is the biggest thing at school? And it wasn't failing, it wasn't not understanding subjects. But now the answer that came back was, our biggest fear at school is if somebody takes a photo of us and puts it on social media. Now
Wow.
think about the stress or the mental stress that has if you go to school and if you're worried that what if someone takes a picture and puts it on social media. It's
And it's
pretty
everywhere.
crazy. So
It's everywhere. I mean, I can take a picture of you right now and put it on social media. So because everyone has a
yeah,
phone with a camera, and
yeah,
that's a lot of pressure to actually handle. We were like happy-go-lucky, right? It doesn't matter what
yeah,
you're dressed up in,
it doesn't
Uh,
matter.
yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah. So there's a So more than competition, it's more about how am I seen in the world.
Yes, how is the world seeing me? How am I being portrayed in the world?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and this is a generation, and not a generation, but this is a these are people who are between 16 and 19, where they're still trying to figure out themselves and still trying to figure out those, I won't even call the core values, but just the lived values of how they actually want to show up. And it's so much being shaped by the external environment.
yeah, totally, totally. And as you know, in development theory, between the ages of 0 and 7, it's your parents who form your identity, and then from 7 to 14, da da da. But that, as you said before, the 16 to 19 is you trying to form your own identity in the world. But if your identity is shaped by what other people think, are you actually forming your own identity?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you obviously you've worked with multiple different cultures, from the Asian, Southeast Asian, and to European, to the American or North American, and so on. Different measures of success. What's the thread that runs across all these cultures in terms of how the teenagers, so to the more grown up teenagers, how are they uh, responding or being put on the spot in terms of
Yeah,
success?
yeah. I think this is interesting for me because I think this is where the cultural construct comes into play. So if we think about our collective cultures, which are in the East and indigenous cultures, success is when success helps the collective, which is why, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, I'm helping the community. And then if I look at the Western cultures, it's more about individual success. I will be a banker, I will be a financial, I will be this here. And it's driven from my anecdotal, from what I've seen, it's driven just by also the upbringing as well, the upbringing of the culture.
And
And I'll share something with you that really blew my mind. If we go back to what you asked me about the culture shock in New Zealand, when I moved to New Zealand, one of the number one culture shocks for me was when a friend of mine who was European said to me that he lives with his parents, but his parents charge him rent. And that blew my mind. I was like, I don't understand that. This is crazy. I don't understand this. He was 16, right, or 17, and I was like, wow, my parents would never charge me rent, but it's normalized. So, and as I started getting living in New Zealand a bit longer, I would have parents saying to me, "Oh, I can't wait for my child to turn 18 when I can kick them out of the house or they can pay rent." And to me, I was like this still blows my mind till today.
foreign, it's still foreign to us. It's still foreign to me right now. And my son is 19, and I don't
Yeah,
foresee him moving out anytime soon. Nor do I want that.
yeah, that's right.
I
So
dread
it's
that
really,
time.
yeah, so it's really, goes back to the question, the collectivism versus the individualism, and what story is being told, and it's norm, like it's a normal conversation, and I'm like, I could never have this conversation. I mean, my parents would gladly have me home right now in my 40s, right? They're like, come home and live with us. There's no drama, right? And
Yeah,
fine,
yeah.
So
So
yeah, so
yeah, good, good
back
to
to your,
understand.
your thread. Back to your thread. I think the thread is culturally determined as well.
And so let's come back to this thread and you. How do you see this thing playing out in your own life when you were in that age bracket? What was your pressure? You became a computer scientist. Why didn't you become a
Yeah,
doctor or an engineer or something?
yeah, yeah. So
And then to
I was
teaching. That's
yeah
not
I was
something that our countries like really appreciate. Oh, you're just a teacher. Okay. My son is like a
yeah
college teacher.
yeah.
That's a good thing.
It's really, yeah. It's just, I guess I was very lucky that my mother's a doctor. My mom is a doctor. So you would think that they
You
would be
fulfill
like,
that dream.
yeah. She like you, but I was very lucky. My parents were like, hey, you just do what's right for you, and yeah. So none of my siblings are in the medical fields. We've all done our own things, and yeah. So I think that's a testament to our parents just going, hey, you decide, and if it happens to be medical school, that's all good. But if it's not, then we'll be happy to support you. And computer science was the way I chose computer science. I just opened a book and I was like, I don't know what to study. I'm going to go to computer science. And it was the time when computer science was going massive. But my passion has always been helping people, and so I realized that later on that people. So education, and with what I do now with coaching and all that, it's all about development, right? It's all about growth. It's a growth, and you grow every day. When you're with young people. I mean, I feel super young because I work with all the young people and the aspirational, the inspirational. They challenge you and they test you, but there's no job in this world where you're not getting challenged or tested.
Yeah, of course, and it's a good challenge because working with young people has this beautiful advantage of really, them looking at things from a very different perspective. Because I mean, as you grow older, you're like, okay, this is done and dusted, and I know this, and this is how the norms are, and your brain is choosing the automatic versus the real critical thinking. So I think that healthy skepticism for a young guy, that teaches us a lot as well. I mean, I love teaching, and I've always enjoyed teaching, because there's always a different perspective, and the younger you get the audience, the more different the perspective becomes. But at the same time, um, isn't it also the thing that, as you work with, because you said that your work says that there's identity is all about how you are, essentially the challenges that are there in your life, and how you deal with them. That's what shapes identity. So how has your identity shaped up based on all the work that you do and all the backgrounds that you have learned from?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. So in my work, I have one phrase which I call identity gravity. So what is it that each one of us gravitates to subconsciously? Um, what is it? When you make a decision. So, for example, imposter syndrome or not wanting to say something. What is the conversation that you're having, that you're being pulled back to at that whatever age you are? And this is work that we keep on doing. And when you think, if I think about myself, if someone said to me that, hey, you'll be on a 10 years ago, someone said to me, hey, you'll be on a podcast, you'll be coaching, you'll be a speaker, blah, blah. I'll be like, what are you talking about? Because
Really?
when I now think about it, my identity gravity was, when I think about growing up, I was always told to keep quiet, in school, don't talk, it's not the right thing to do, you get into trouble. But that was the identity gravity shift towards like just being the quiet person. So a lot of work has come into play. However, that doesn't mean right now that I don't have moments where I get pulled back into that, because gravity, as you know, is always there. You just got to be aware of it. So that is there, but the awareness, and I love this. One of my my friends told me this great quote here. We all hear about awareness precedes change. That's mentioned many times. But she said to me that awareness is awesome, but anytime after that, you have a choice. So once you become aware, you then make a choice. And that changed my mind. So if you don't know awareness, cool, it's fine. I don't know, that's fine. But the minute you're aware, you now have an active choice, and you're choosing not to, or you're choosing to. And that reminded me that, when you have that moment of identity question mark, you are then choosing to go back to your identity, where your story is, or you're choosing to build a different level of your identity in that moment there. So yeah, my identity, I think it keeps shifting and change. Well, the core is the same. I think, like the core is the same, but the appearance changes as I learn different skills.
Yeah. So again, the way you present that identity keeps changing.
Yes.
Teaching, and then coaching, and then training, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm thinking. Do you think that this identity evolution, if I may use that, is that something that you see uh, as a thread in how people really evolve over time, or is that uh, you know only based on if and when people are aware of what they need to be aware of?
I love this question here, and I think you will see this in your own work as a facilitator, as a trainer, as a coach. If you think about all those conversations, it's that awareness piece of what. procrastination or whatever they bring to the situation. It is an identity or belief system that they are leaning into. And then the evolution or the revolution changes when they leave your session going, that is an old story that I've been telling myself. It's not true anymore. So, which is why I think the power of what we do is the power that we bring people in that 20 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever in that container of what story they're telling themselves. In my world, what is the identity that they have latched onto? And as a coach, you bring the awareness piece, and then there's a evolution and revolution. So it's a rewrite of the story that they have been telling themselves for X amount of years. And if you think about it done with your work, and you see this with your clients and your NLP, your just coaching, ICF coaching, it's the belief change or the values proposition that changes for them.
Yeah, and that's where your work also speaks to me, because ultimately, I mean, the way I look at it is, and here's where I was also thinking of when you were talking about awareness and identity. The way I look at it is that either identity is something that's pushed onto you as being part of the environment that you are, or identity is something that you choose to have, right? And that's, I think that's the most fundamental choice that human beings um, need to strive towards, or because that real choice really defines how your trajectory is going to be, right? Is it Prajesh give me this identity, or did I choose this identity? Of course, I mean, you can't forget that, every interaction that I have with my environment is shaping me. My
That's right.
parents are shaping me, my culture is shaping me, my religion is shaping me, my norms are shaping me, my education is shaping me. But at the end of the day, do I have a do I have a sort of, it's like a fort, and I only decide what comes through the fort, or it's like open for all, and everyone could come in and have a good time and then just leave. So what's really coming up for me? So that's how I see it. Uh, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's two ways, right? There's the person that has the open fort and lets everyone in, but then they lose themselves totally because they don't know who they are. If you think about someone who just lets I just everyone come into my world, and then you have those who have the closed fort, who also don't allow themselves to then change that or realize who they are. And you
Hmm.
think about this with some people who are so, I remember a conversation I had with a friend many years ago, and he is a devout Christian, like devout Christian, which is great. And he shared with me one day, I was like, Daniel, why don't you come out with us? You don't have to do anything. Why don't you come out with us? And he said, no, if I come out, then I'm going to be tempted to do stuff. Tempted. And I was like, but if you're so strong with your faith, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be tempted. And to me, that's someone that just lives in their fort and doesn't let anyone in because they're afraid of what might happen. Whereas if they go out a little bit and they test their fort. Yeah, I'm testing my fort, and if my fort still stands, then hey, this is who I am. But if I don't test my fort against anything, is my fort actually a fort? Or is it just a structure?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's a beautiful example. I mean, I'm looking at it from this perspective that while I'm choosing my identity, is my environment still a major part of what my identity is? I mean, when I choose my identity, of course, I choose my environment as well. Ultimately,
yeah.
um, have I become too narrow in that, which means my identity also becomes very narrow in terms of how I show up in the world, or am I broad enough? And of course, I will have to let go of some temptations in some situations and stuff like that. But am I threatened by it, or am I able to absorb it when it's there? I mean, for example, in my culture, my religion, we don't drink, right?
Yes.
And I wouldn't be part of of a situation where I'm where people are openly drinking or something. So I won't go to a bar, for example, right? But
Mhm.
if I am uh, having dinner, let's say somewhere in a Western country, and my colleague offers a beer, I wouldn't be tempted to try it or say, well, no, oh my God, you offended it. So how much
Mhm.
is that tree able to weather the storm that's coming in? I think that's what you were talking
Yeah.
about.
That's right, and that's a true test. Like for example, as you said, you're not actively going to go to a bar. That's cool, but you also conversely you're not going to not have a dinner with your friend because they're having alcohol. That's you. Okay,
Yeah.
you go because your identity is so strong that this is who I am. That even if this comes, I'm able to say no. Because I know who I am, and I'm not offending anybody because my values, my principles, my identity is who I am. And I think that's to me, when you know your identity and are able to say yes and no, then you have the ability. But if you're too close and too open, then you're still playing games. You're not too sure who you are.
So how do you get to that kind of identity? What's the first thing that uh, people need to do to actually be able to not even choose, think about their identity?
Yeah, I think that's a pertinent question because it's easy for when you have growth. But the question I like to ask is, what do you want to show up in the world as? Like, what do you want? What are you showing up as? And when you pass on, because we're all going to pass away, what is the legacy that you want
Oh,
to
I love this
leave?
question. Yeah, I love this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I had someone on my podcast, and he gave me the greatest learning I've ever thought. And he just said to me that his invitation to everyone is to be the best ancestor you can be. And that just blows my mind because if you think about it, every single one of us here is because of our ancestors.
yeah,
So he was like, the next generation, you are going to be the ancestor, so be the best ancestor. And if that ties into your identity, whatever that is, to me that was like a boom. What a light bulb moment when we think about it in that way.
yeah. That's a very very powerful thing. I never thought of it. It's just so powerful. It takes care of who you are going to be as an individual and who you are going to be in the longer scheme of things. The continuation of who and how you want to be takes care of the individual and takes care of the community, so to say. Because I
That's
mean,
right. Yeah.
I've always thought about it this way that if I die today, who are the people who are going to show up? And
Yeah.
when someone calls up and says that this person has died, what is the identity that they're going to say? Of course, they're going to take my name, but who is the person? Is that a CEO of the company, or Adnan the coach, or Adnan the trainer, or Adnan the father of X, or Adnan the husband? So, where is my identity really anchored in, so to say? But
Hmm.
the question that you just told me is that just blew me away, right? Because it's not just who I am today who's passed on, but who I am to the next generation and the generation after, because they're standing on my shoulders like I've stood on my ancestors' shoulders. That's just so
Yeah.
powerful. So,
Yeah.
how do you get to that phase? What's the
I
what's
think
the
this.
what's the
Yeah. I
trajectory?
think this is. I think the first step is just thinking about right now. To our listeners out there, is just to think about right now. What 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 identity story are you telling yourself? So if you use your example, is my identity tied into the fact that I am a business owner or father or whatever, right? So you can put them all down. So actually, this is what I would recommend you do. Get a piece of paper and write down all the identities that you come up with, spouse, whatever it is. And then as you go through that, start circling out the ones that actually can be replaced. Cost them out. So if I'm a CEO, that can be replaced tomorrow. You think about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs replaced straight away. He passed away. We remember him, but he's replaced. See, that title is gone. So you
Yeah,
go through that list there, and I'm not going to tell you what's what. You figure out that list there, and then you come down to the one or two identities that really stand up for you, and then you ask yourself, am I living my life truly for those identities? Am I showing up in that identity every day? And if I'm not, what do I need to be doing to be showing up in that identity as my north star?
that's a beautiful way to do it. I'm just thinking when I do something like that. I mean, it's easier to get rid of the external roles, right? The CEO, the job titles, and stuff like that. But I see, because I do a lot of work with individuals, non-corporate backgrounds as well,
Mhm.
uh, and I see the great challenge that I always keep coming across is that people let go of the external identities in terms of the roles, the corporate speak, so to say. But what about identity that I am a mother, or I am a wife, or I am a daughter, and so on? because
Hmm.
I think that also influences a lot of uh, who how we decide to show up, right? And it can be threatening as well to the very person we are, but sometimes that's the only identity we carry.
Or is it what we've been told? Has the world told us this is what you're carrying? Before you became a mother, what were you? Before you became a father, what were you?
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is where I was getting at. If I understand correctly, what who are we when we strip away all those things? Because
Yeah.
there was a Prajesh when he was not, in New Zealand, and there was a Prajesh when he was not a PhD, and there was a Prajesh when he did
Hmm.
not have a partner, and there was a Prajesh uh, before this and after this. Uh,
Yeah.
so so is that the right way to look at that?
That is the right way because again, even father, husband, spouse, wife is a role. It's a role. That's what we're playing. It's a role, but we don't see that there because we're like, oh, we're so tied into the fact that but actually, no, no, no. It's a phase of your life that you're doing. But even for you to be the best father, husband, there's still an identity in there. How are you showing up to be the best version of what that is? Because if we think about, let's just say the two of us, right, and we both identify as partners, as husbands, or yeah, as husbands. Your version and my version are very different because the story that we've come up with is also very, very different. So it goes down to that next layer. Where does that story come from? And is the story actually living up to what we really want it to be?
Yeah, yeah. And that also makes me think that so identity is not just about the roles that we have, even as the roles that are more hardwired, like parenting or being a child or being a spouse, uh, but also it is about who am I as my best self.
Yeah. Who am I as myself? Who am I as myself? When everything is taken away from me and I'm sitting in a room by myself without any of those things there, who am I?
Yeah, because I mean, who I am will show up irrespective of whatever roles I adopt, right? So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I can only be a good spouse if I am a good. I mean, the good comes before the being the spouse, right? So,
100%.
a good
100%.
son or a good spouse or a good employee or a good employer would always be a latter fill in the blank versus the adjective that we're talking about.
That's right. Yeah. What is
Yeah.
the precursor? What is the precursor that led you to be a good? What is that? The good. Insert the good.
And what stops people from being that way, from considering this?
Because I think it's sometimes because it's sometimes you have to have the difficult conversation, and sometimes it takes you into places that are actually it's because we don't give ourself time and space to do that there. If you think about your question just now, as you said, with parents, use your parents, husband, wife, whatever title, grandfather, we don't ever pause to go, okay, if I take that away, what happens? If you a clear indicator, for example, in the Western world is when people retire. There's two things that happen when people retire. Number one, they either are super happy because they've never tied their, their, their identity to their role, or number two, there's those that get depressed and get
Or
sick
depressed, yeah.
because they've tied their whole life to their identity of whatever job. So that's a clear indicator there. Where am I if I take that all away?
Yeah, yeah. So let me put that to you. Who are you when we take all of that away?
Who are we gonna take that? Oh, yeah. I don't know if I don't know. This is an ongoing thing for me because I am this is work that I'm also doing on myself as well. It's easy to talk about, but I have to live it and think about it and think about back to what Kudrin said to me is what is how can I be the best ancestor, right? And that's is yeah, it's ongoing. So I can't
Yeah.
answer the question. Come back to me in maybe 10 years time or 5 years time.
All right, I sure will. Um, so let me rephrase this, and I take the quest answer, but let me also add two facets to it. What are you discovering about yourself today that you had not known about yourself?
Yeah. The more I know, I realize the less I know about myself. The more I start learning about myself, the less I go. Actually, I didn't know that about myself, and there's always more. I think one of the things that I have discovered about myself um, is that there were stories I was living that were not my stories. That I was living someone else's stories. And it's really funny you say this to me about being an educator and coaching. And when I tell some people in my family, they're like, "What are you talking about? What is that? That is not a thing. That's not a thing." And I remember when I first started coaching, I didn't want to tell anybody because I was afraid of the. I was, yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I thought I lost you there. Yeah. I think back to what I was saying there is because I was living someone else's story. I was living someone else's story that being a coach or an educator is not a thing. So the more I learn, the fact that I need to start living my own story and write my own story, write my own book, is what I'm discovering with myself. But also the other thing on top of that is I'm learning some of the things that I learned from my parents, which I brushed aside, are actually really true things and are actually really valuable. As they get older and I speak to them as they're older, I think about those and they're actually, yeah, this is really true. Being a good human, being a good human in the day, costs you nothing. It costs you nothing to be a good human, right?
Yeah,
Just be a good human. Yeah.
yeah. And is that what you're becoming in this moment, or growing towards, or aspiring, journeying towards, maybe?
Yeah, I hope so. I think this is why I've got into coaching. I've got into development because I think, and you know this, Adnan, and I love your thoughts about this as well. Is when you do the coaching, the facilitation, it's not about you. For me, it's not about me. It's about I'm helping the person, and whether they pay me or not pay me or whatever, that's cool if they pay me, but if they don't, they leave and their world has changed, and by their world changing, the impact they have has changed as well. So for me, that's why I do what I do, and I'm hopefully that's my way of being a good person.
That's so beautifully put. And I think I can safely say about coaching, and the bulk of the coaches that I've met, this is why they do what they do, and I think that's a very good purpose to have a meaningful life. And I think being this person, being this coach, and not just being a professional coach, but that mindset. I think that's really something that changes a lot of perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, and I'd love your thoughts, Adan. What is your identity today as I reflect the question back to you?
So in one of my podcasts, there were a couple of people, two different podcasts, but they both said the same thing. Um, this is we're human becomings, we're not human beings.
Hmm.
So um, I think, and I'm actually writing something on my own evolution of identity over the past, let's say, all the decades that I've lived. And so it's only one facet of it, but um, I see the transition and the changes, and so on. And I think it just comes back to, am I someone that people can look back and say, well, he um, changed or helped us change the trajectory of our life to a better one, whatever it is. I don't assume that it was bad. I just assume that there could be something better. So
Hmm.
one interaction, one conversation, one sentence, something that people can um, remember and take that forward with themselves. So I think that's what I am trying to become, and it's a hard journey, really, to be in that moment and to actually remember the purpose of what you want to be known as when you pass on. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't think about a lot about making my children or my grandchildren proud. If they're proud, great. If they haven't, or if they aren't, well, that's their criteria. But internally, am I doing the right thing that sets the foundation for them to look back on and say, well, given the situation, he was doing what he could do best. I think that's a personal excellence that I choose. So yeah,
And that's beautiful, because I think, like what you said before, we're humans, right? We every human beings, human becomings, but we have emotions. We react. We never, there'll be days when we are angry, upset, frustrated. All those emotions come through, and I think for our listeners out there, it's just important to remember that this is not a linear pathway. It's not a good or bad. It's just, as you said before, you are showing up the best that you can be in that particular moment. And the next
yeah,
moment might not be the best, and that's okay. But in this moment, am I being the best?
yeah. That search for excellence and meaning has to be in the moment,
Yeah,
and that's where we need to live in, right? Next moment, well, we'll figure that out when it comes, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
So,
that's so
so
true.
Nish, I am about to, we're about to hit that 1 hour mark. So I'll just, try and bring this to a closure. Um, what you've worked a lot on all of this, the identity gravity, and the whole thing that you've done and so on. What's the one thing that stays with you in all of the roles, across different dimensions, and the one value that you would like to really take forward going forward in your life?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very, very good question. I think that there's two things there. Number one is, take time to think about where your identity sits today. Like, take some time and think about it. And is it your identity, or is it someone else's identity that you are living? And number two, if it is someone else's identity, don't be afraid to challenge and change that. I think this is where the fear comes into play, Um, and the value that I am taking, I think I've said this a few times, is how can I be a good person in this moment? And if you're a good person, and you took the words out of my mouth, and then you just said the one sentence, the one word. It doesn't have to be a big grandiose action. It can just be a smile. Even a one smile can just change someone else's world just by that. So those are my two things. Think about your identity, challenge it, and then be a good person.
Great. So, Prajesh, thank you very much for being here. I won't take a lot of your time. It's pretty late for you. Uh,
Thank you,
11 now.
Adnan.
I
That's
love
right.
the conversation. Always a pleasure. And I hope to have you on the podcast soon in some time as well.
No worries. Thank you for having me, Adnan, and it's a pleasure and it's a real honor being here. So and keep up the awesome work that you're doing. I just want to say, like I said, I'm really inspired by the NLP work, but also your recent accreditation. I mean, that's really, really cool. That's going to be having a ripple effect for people in Pakistan and around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prajesh. I'll see you.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye.